My name is Ashley Thompson, 35 years old, and until last year, I owned Vintage Treasures, the beloved antique store my grandmother left me in San Francisco. My sister and my parents demanded I give her half ownership. When I refused, they took matters into their own hands in the most devastating way possible. They burned down my store, my heritage, my everything. But what the judge revealed during our court case shook our entire city to its core, and then one day after the verdict, I had 66 missed calls from journalists hounding me for the story. It started with a will reading that flipped everything upside down. They exploded in rage, accusing me of twisting an old woman's mind, swearing I'd pay for not splitting it fair. The attacks hit hard right away, non-stop calls at odd hours, vicious texts flipping between guilt and threats, even relatives I'd barely seen chiming in with their disappointment. Then my sister barged in one busy evening, reeking of alcohol, shouting that I'd robbed her of what was rightfully hers, knocking over displays and shattering priceless pieces before I had the cops haul her out. But that was nothing compared to what came next, the fire that erased it all in one night, a calculated move to cash in on insurance they figured they'd claim. I raced there in the dark, heart pounding, only to see it all going up in smoke, every artifact with its hidden history reduced to ash. Footage from a nearby camera nailed them setting it up, but the real bombshell waited in court. We went to trial, fast evidence piling up on their harassment, the fake policy they'd forged with my signature. Tensions boiled as they took the stand, dodging questions, but the judge dropped the hammer with secrets they'd buried for years. Twists about family ties and past schemes that left the courtroom gasping and the city buzzing with headlines. Reporters swarmed my phone, lighting up with those 6 calls the very next day, everyone desperate for more. Before I dive deeper into how it all unfolded, I want to know, what time are you listening right now and which city are you in? It makes me so happy to see how far stories like this can spread. Hit that like button if you're already on the edge of your seat, and subscribe to catch the full betrayal, the courtroom shocks, and how I pushed back. Vintage Treasures was more than just a store. It was the heart of my grandmother's vision, launched 50 years ago as a single mom, scouring estate sales for hidden gems. From a cramped corner shop with a handful of curios, she built it into a San Francisco icon where every item told a tale of bygone eras. Our connection ran deep. I was her shadow, soaking up lessons on spotting authentic relics, haggling with suppliers, charming tough collectors. By 10, I could date a Civil War button, blindfolded. She drilled in the basics. Respect your team handle. Complaints smoothly. Remember, you're trading in nostalgia, not just stuff. She'd tell me, Ashley, we're guardians of history, selling whispers from the past that people need today. It built my backbone. But my family, they dismissed it as a dusty pastime, unworthy of their attention, until the inheritance sparked their greed. And that's when the real storm hit. My bond with my grandmother was different from anything I had with the rest of my family. Growing up in San Francisco, I spent every weekend and summer at her apartment above Vintage Treasures, trailing her through the cluttered aisles of the antique store. She'd pull out a tarnished silver locket or a chipped porcelain teacup and tell me its story, where it came from, who might have owned it, what it meant to someone decades ago. By the time I was 10, I could spot a genuine Victorian cameo from a cheap knockoff across the room. She taught me how to haggle with estate sale dealers, restore faded oil paintings, and keep the books balanced. More than that, she showed me how to treat the staff like family and turn picky collectors into regulars with a smile and some patience. She'd say, Ashley, we're not just selling old things, we're keeping history alive, giving people a piece of the past to hold on to. Those words stuck with me, shaping how I saw the world. The store wasn't just her business. It was her heart. Her legacy poured into every carefully curated item. My parents, though, they couldn't have cared less. They were always too busy chasing their real estate deals, networking at fancy dinners, or showing off at charity galas. My sister, 3 years younger, was their pride and joy, always whisked off to private music lessons, cheerleading camps, or lavish birthday parties at places like Six Flags. For her 10th birthday, they rented out a whole arcade and bought her a top-of-the-line laptop. Mine a stack of used history books and a thrift store scarf. When I needed new clothes for school, we hit discount racks. For her, it was designer stores, no budget spared. The favoritism wasn't subtle. It started young and never stopped. I learned early to fend for myself, babysitting gigs at 14, waitressing at 16, saving every penny for college. I studied business and art history, dreaming of one day running Vintage Treasures myself. Meanwhile, my sister flunked out of 2 colleges each time with a new excuse: wrong major, bad professors, you name it. My parents covered her rent, her car payments, her credit card bills. She'd land some flashy job with her charm, only to quit or get fired within months. Money burned through her hands faster than she could spend it, but they were always there to bail her out. It shaped us in opposite ways. I worked harder, valued what I earned, knew the weight of every dollar. She expected the world to bend for her, just like our parents always did. The gap between us grew wider every year. I'd be cataloging rare books in the store's back room, breathing in the musty smell of old leather while she was off at some party or blowing cash on a new purse. Vintage Treasures was my refuge, a place where I wasn't the overlooked daughter or the second-best sibling. It was where I belonged, tied to my grandmother's vision of preserving the past. As she got older, into her 70s, I noticed the long hours were wearing her down. She'd never admit it, she was too stubborn for that, but I saw the way she leaned on the counter to catch her breath, or how her hands trembled when she polished delicate glassware. I started spending more time at the store, showing up before dawn to sort new inventory, staying late to close up. On slow Sundays, we'd experiment with displays, rearranging vintage jewelry or staging old typewriters to catch the eye of tourists strolling by. My parents rarely set foot in the place. If they did, it was for some obligatory holiday visit, dragging my sister along, who'd roll her eyes at the dusty junk and whine about the lack of modern flair. I could feel the distance with my family growing like a crack in a fragile vase you don't notice until it shatters. My grandmother was my real anchor, the one who saw me for who I was, who believed I could carry her dream forward. I had no idea how soon that dream would be tested, or how viciously my family would try to tear it apart. The call came on a foggy Tuesday morning in March. I was at an estate sale across town, bidding on a rare 19th century pocket watch, when my phone buzzed. It was Stacy, the head clerk at Vintage Treasures, her voice shaking. My grandmother had collapsed in the back room while sorting a box of old letters. I dropped everything and sped to the hospital, weaving through San Francisco traffic, praying it wasn't serious. But when I got there, the doctor's face told me everything. A massive heart attack. Quick, they said, almost painless. But there was nothing painless about the void it left in me. The funeral was a blur. My parents took over, as they always did, turning it into a spectacle that felt nothing like the woman we were burying. They picked a polished mahogany casket that cost more than my grandmother's old car, ordered towering floral arrangements, and hired a minister she'd never met. Regular customers from the store showed up, their faces familiar, from years of chats over vintage finds, offering quiet condolences. I stood there nodding mechanically, feeling hollow, like a piece of me had been carved out. A week later, we gathered at Mr. Larson's law office for the will reading. My parents sat across the table, stiff and polished in their designer suits. My sister slouched beside them, scrolling on her phone, barely looking up. I sat alone, still numb, clutching a small locket my grandmother had given me years ago. Mr. Larson cleared his throat and started reading, his voice steady and formal. A few small bequests went to distant cousins and longtime staff. Then he got to the part that changed everything. To my granddaughter, Ashley Thompson, I leave Vintage Treasures, including the building, all inventory, and the apartment above. She's been its soul as much as I have, and I trust her to carry its legacy forward with the same love for history that we share. The room went silent, heavy like the air before a storm. Then my father slammed his fist on the table, his face red. "This is ridiculous. That store belongs to the family, not just her." My mother let out a sob, loud and dramatic, more angry than sad. My sister stood her chair screeching and flung a glass paperweight off the desk, shattering it against the wall. "What about me?" she shouted. "I'm family too. This is unfair." Mr. Larson stayed calm, pulling an envelope from his drawer. "Your grandmother anticipated this reaction," he said, sliding it across the table. The letter was in her neat, familiar handwriting. She explained how I'd spent years learning every corner of the business, respecting its traditions while bringing new ideas, curating rare manuscripts, hosting history talks for locals. My sister, she wrote, had never shown interest beyond asking for cash to fund her lifestyle. My parents had dismissed the store as a hobby unworthy of their time. She wanted vintage treasures to thrive, not be sold off for a quick buck or mismanaged into ruin. My father snatched the letter, scanning it like he could rewrite it with his glare. "Can we fight this?" he demanded. Mr. Larson adjusted his glasses. "Her mental state was certified by 2 doctors 6 months ago. The will is airtight." My mother turned to me, tears streaming, voice sharp. "How could you do this to us, Ashley, manipulating her to cut out your own family?" I shook my head, stunned. "This was her choice, not mine. You were always her favorite." My sister spat, leaning across the table, playing the perfect granddaughter, cozying up to get it all. My father pointed a finger at me, his voice low and cold. "You've got a choice, Ashley. Share this with your sister, or you'll tear this family apart." The days that followed were relentless. My phone lit up with calls at all hours. My mother sobbing about her broken heart. My father issuing ultimatums, cousins I hadn't seen in years texting their disapproval. My sister was the worst, leaving voicemails dripping with venom. "You think you can run that place?" she sneered in one. "You'll crash and burn, Ashley. Might as well give me my half now before you ruin everything." I clung to my grandmother's letter, rereading it every night, her words grounding me. She'd seen the family dynamics, clearly knew they'd fight me, knew they'd try to guilt me into giving in. Betraying her wishes would be betraying her memory. So I stood my ground. Vintage Treasures was mine, and I'd honor her vision no matter what they threw at me. But their anger was building, and I could feel it spiraling towards something darker. Taking over Vintage Treasures full-time was like stepping onto a tightrope. I'd worked alongside my grandmother for years, but running the show alone, handling every vendor, every repair, every customer complaint was a whole new beast. The first weeks were brutal. I found unpaid invoices stuffed in drawers, suppliers I didn't know we had, and a creaky air conditioner that gave out during a heat wave. I was at the store 18 hours a day, sleeping in the apartment upstairs, too drained to drive to my own place across town. But I poured everything into it, determined to prove my grandmother right. I kept the store's core intact. Her signature displays of vintage clocks and rare manuscripts stayed front and center. But I added my own touch. I launched monthly history talks with local authors, set up an Instagram page showcasing our finds, and started a loyalty program for regulars. To my surprise, business didn't just hold steady. It took off. Tourists flocked in after a glowing review in the Chronicle, praising the new energy in a San Francisco classic. Weekend slots for our appraisal events booked solid. Even a picky antique blogger called us the city's hidden gem, thriving under my care. But my family's resentment only grew hotter. Their attacks ramped up, no longer just angry voicemails. My parents started calling the store's line during peak hours, tying up staff with fake complaints about pricing or inventory. My sister posted fake 1-star reviews online claiming we sold fakes or overcharged lies I spent hours disputing with Yelp and Google. Then she took it further. One packed Friday night with customers browsing for holiday gifts, she stormed in, clearly drunk, her voice cutting through the chatter. "This is my store too," she yelled, shoving a shelf of vintage glassware to the floor, shards scattering. "You stole it, Ashley. You're a fraud." Customers froze, staring. I tried to calm her, but she kept screaming until Stacy called the police. 2 officers escorted her out as she cursed my name, leaving me to face a room of stunned faces. I went table to table offering apologies and free coffee, my hands shaking. Most customers were kind, but the damage was done. Whispers followed and a few left early. The next morning, my father called. "You had your sister arrested," he barked. "Your mother's heartbroken, Ashley. How low will you go?" I kept my voice steady. "She was drunk, wrecking my business." I had no choice. His tone turned icy. "There's always a choice. You made yours. Now we'll make ours." The threat hung over me like a storm cloud. That afternoon, I hired a security company to install cameras around the store and added a guard for weekend evenings. I went to the courthouse with witness statements from staff and customers, filing for a restraining order against my sister. My parents fought back in their own way, calling old family friends, even my high school teachers, spinning tales about how I'd conned my grandmother and betrayed my family. People I'd known forever started looking at me differently. Fewer texts, colder nods at the grocery store. The isolation stung, but the store's staff became my lifeline. Stacy, who'd worked there for a decade, rallied everyone, covering shifts when I was too afraid to function, bringing me takeout when I forgot to eat. My friend Nicole stepped up too. She'd known my grandmother well, often stopping by to browse rare books or chat over coffee. After closing one night, she stayed late, helping me sort through threatening texts and review footage from the new cameras. "You're doing what she wanted," Nicole said, her voice firm. "She always said you were the one to carry this place forward." Her support kept me grounded when everything felt like it was slipping away. Then came the night that broke me. At 2:30 a.m., my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another harassing call. But something made me answer. "Miss Thompson, this is the San Francisco Fire Department. There's been a fire at your property on Market Street. You need to come now." I threw on clothes and raced over heart-hammering running red lights in a daze. When I turned onto Market, the sky glowed orange smoke curling into the night. Fire trucks blocked the street, their sirens piercing. Vintage Treasures was a ruin. Flames had swallowed the building, leaving nothing but charred beams and ash where history once stood. A firefighter stopped me from getting closer, the heat like a wall. "That's my store," I choked out. "My grandmother's legacy. Everything." He shook his head, grim. "We got here fast, but it was too late. The building's gone." I sank onto a bench across the street, watching it burn for hours, each crackle erasing another piece of her dream. By dawn, the fire was out, but nothing was left: her antique oak desk, the wall of old photos from estate sales, the rare first editions we'd hunted together, all gone. The fire chief approached, his face heavy. "Miss Thompson, early signs point to arson. We found evidence of foul play." My stomach dropped. "Arson," I whispered. He nodded. "We're pulling footage from nearby businesses. Your cameras didn't make it, but the pharmacy across the street might have something." Later that day, they called me in. The grainy video showed two figures circling the store at 1 a.m., my father's familiar stride, my sister's nervous pacing. They paused at the back entrance, then vanished. 20 minutes later, flames lit up the windows. The police moved fast, arresting them that evening. I wasn't there, but I could picture it: my father blustering about his innocence, my sister trying to charm her way out. My mother called that night, sobbing. "How could you do this to us, Ashley? They're in jail because of you." I cut her off, voice shaking. "They burned it down. They destroyed everything." She didn't listen. "If you'd just shared, none of this would have happened. Drop the charges, please." I hung up my hands, trembling, the weight of their betrayal sinking deeper. Nicole showed up the next day with a folder, her face grim. "I dug into the store's insurance policy," she said. "It's been changed recently. Way higher coverage for fire damage with your signature. But it's not yours, is it?" I stared at the papers, the truth hitting like a punch. This wasn't just anger, it was a calculated plan to cash in on my loss. And the deeper we dug, the uglier the secrets we'd uncover in court. The trial kicked off on a sweltering August morning, 6 months after the fire that gutted Vintage Treasures. I walked up the San Francisco courthouse steps, pushing through a crowd of reporters shouting questions, their camera flashes blinding. Inside, the air-conditioned courtroom felt too small, too personal for the pain about to unfold. My attorney, Rachel Cooper, sat at our table, stacking documents with precision. Across the aisle, my father and sister sat with their lawyer, a slick guy named Timothy Grant, known for his loud theatrical defenses. My father looked polished in a gray suit, playing the part of a wronged businessman. My sister had cleaned up too, her usual messy ponytail swapped for a neat bun, but her eyes avoided mine. My mother sat behind them, dressed in black, staring at the floor. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Patricia Ellis entered, her sharp gaze scanning the room. Opening statements set the tone. Timothy Grant went first, painting me as the greedy granddaughter who'd manipulated an old woman to steal the family's inheritance. "This is about fairness," he boomed. My clients acted out of hurt, trying to reclaim what should have been shared. Rachel countered with cold facts, laying out a timeline of harassment-threatening calls, fake reviews, my sister's public outburst culminating in the arson and a forged insurance policy. "This wasn't a mistake," she said. "It was a calculated plan to destroy Ashley's livelihood and defraud an insurance company." Witnesses took the stand. Stacy, my head clerk, recounted my sister's drunken scene, how she'd smashed glassware and scared customers. The insurance agent, Andrew, squirmed as he admitted pushing through a suspicious policy update at my father's request, a favor for an old college buddy. The fire investigator confirmed the blaze was deliberate, pointing to traces of gasoline at the store's back entrance. Rachel projected emails between my father and sister dated weeks before the fire. My father wrote the new policies set. "Once it's done, we'll have enough to start fresh, and she'll have nothing." My sister replied, "Can't wait to see her face when it's all gone." The courtroom murmured the words, hanging heavy. I felt sick, their cruelty laid bare in black and white. When I testified, I kept it simple, describing my years learning from my grandmother, the harassment that followed her will, the night I lost everything to flames. I avoided looking at my family, focusing on Rachel's steady nod and the judge's attentive stare. My father went next, trying to play the desperate parent pushed to extremes by an unfair will. Rachel's cross-examination tore him apart. He stumbled over the forged policy, claiming it was a clerical error, then contradicted himself about the emails, calling them just talk. My sister was worse, defiant at first, then sulky, snapping at Rachel's questions until she looked unhinged, her neat appearance unraveling. On the third day, Judge Ellis called a sudden recess, summoning both legal teams to her chambers. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as we waited. When they returned, Rachel's face was pale and the judge's expression was grim. "New evidence has come to light." Judge Ellis announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "It directly impacts the motives in this case and must be addressed." She nodded to the bailiff, who handed folders to both teams. Inside ours, I glimpsed a birth certificate and old legal papers. Judge Ellis continued, "Documents show that the defendant is not the biological daughter of Matthew and Amanda Thompson." The room gasped. My mind spun, unable to process. Not my sister. She was legally adopted from a cousin of Matthew Thompson after a family tragedy, raised as their own without disclosure. My parents sat frozen, my father's face ashen, my mother clutching her purse. My sister's mouth opened, no sound coming out, her eyes wide with shock. "There's more," the judge said. "Evidence shows Matthew and Amanda Thompson attempted to alter Elizabeth Hayes's will 2 years before her death, using forged documents to redirect assets. Mrs. Hayes discovered this and revised her will with added protections to ensure Ashley inherited vintage treasures." She held up a letter from my grandmother, written in her familiar script, detailing her distrust of her son and daughter-in-law, her certainty that I was the only one who valued her legacy. The courtroom erupted, reporters scribbling, spectators whispering. My sister turned to my father, her voice breaking. "You lied to me my whole life." The bailiff stepped in as she stood shaking, looking ready to lunge. Judge Ellis banged her gavel, ordering her removed until she calmed down. My father shrank in his seat, mumbling, "It's true," when the judge asked if he'd revise his testimony. Rachel leaned over, whispering, "These came from a deeper dive into your grandmother's legal files. She wanted you protected." The trial wrapped quickly after that. My father and sister, cornered by the evidence, pleaded guilty to arson, fraud, and conspiracy. Judge Ellis sentenced my father to 5 years in prison, my sister to 3, with mandatory counseling. They were ordered to pay restitution $75,000 to cover the store's value. The insurance company launched a separate fraud case nullifying their claim. Outside reporters swarmed my phone, buzzing with those 66 missed calls from journalists by noon the next day. The headlines screamed, "Family Secrets Torch San Francisco Antique Store," and "Adoption Lie Sparks Arson Scandal." I felt no victory, just a hollow ache, knowing the family I'd grown up with was built on lies deeper than I'd ever imagined. As I left the courthouse, Nicole waiting outside, I made a choice. I'd rebuild not just the store, but my life free from their poison. But what I found in the ashes would test everything I thought I knew about strength. A year after the fire, I stood on the cleared lot, where vintage treasures once stood, the charred debris gone, the ground ready for a new beginning. With the $75,000 in restitution from my father and sister, plus my own savings and a small business loan, I had the means to rebuild not just a store, but my grandmother's vision. I named it Elizabeth's Keepsakes, a nod to her passion for preserving history. The new building blended the old charm, reclaimed brick walls, stained glass accents from her original sketches, with modern touches like energy-efficient lighting and a sleek event space for history talks. It felt like a bridge between her legacy and my future. The months after the trial were brutal. I couldn't face the ruins at first. The blackened lot, too raw a reminder of what I'd lost. I barely slept, ate only when Nicole forced takeout into my hands, and moved through days like a ghost. The betrayal cut deeper than the fire, knowing my family had planned it, forged my signature on an insurance policy, hidden my sister's origins, even tried to steal from my grandmother years before. It wasn't just the store they'd destroyed. It was any trust I'd ever had in them. Therapy became my anchor. Twice a week, I sat in a quiet office, unraveling the favoritism that shaped my childhood, the lies that defined my family. My therapist helped me see I wasn't the problem their greed and resentment were. I made a hard choice: complete severance. I changed my phone number, blocked their emails, and instructed my staff to hang up on any calls from them. No letters came, no apologies, and I didn't want them. I treated them like strangers, people who no longer existed in my world. It wasn't easy. Nights alone, I'd catch myself wondering if I'd been too harsh, if family meant I owed them a second chance. But then I'd think of my grandmother's letter, her clear-eyed choice to trust me with her dream, and I knew letting them back in would only poison it again. Nicole was my rock through it all. She'd drop by with coffee, help plan the rebuild, and dig through old photos from customers to recreate the store's history wall, a collage of Polaroids and stories from decades of estate sale finds. The staff, some from the original store, rallied too, working overtime to prepare for the opening. We set the grand opening for what would have been my grandmother's 75th birthday, a date that felt like her blessing. As it approached, nerves mixed with excitement. Would the new store capture her spirit? Would customers come back? Had I done her justice? The morning of the opening, a line stretched around the block. Familiar faces from vintage treasures, new ones drawn by the media storm. The Chronicle ran a feature, From Ashes to Keepsakes, a granddaughter's fight for legacy, and locals shared their memories of the old store online. I cut the ribbon, hands steady despite my racing heart, and watched people flood in, exclaiming over the familiar brickwork, the new displays of rare coins and restored paintings. They loved the updated history talks, now paired with local wine tastings, and the menu of services we'd added, like custom appraisals. It wasn't just a store, it was a revival, proof I could rise above what they'd tried to destroy. Standing in the small office off the main floor, I hung a photo of my grandmother, her smile bright against the backdrop of the old store. I whispered a thank you, not just for the inheritance, but for the strength she'd instilled in me to stand firm, to rebuild from nothing, to choose myself over toxic ties. From this, I learned that greed and manipulation can shatter even the closest bonds, but cutting out those who hurt you isn't weakness, it's survival. Public justice, like the trial, doesn't always heal the heart, but it can empower you to reclaim your worth and build something stronger. To anyone listening, here's my advice. Prioritize the people who see your value, who lift you up, not tear you down. Don't let family entitlement or anyone's dim your light. Protect your legacy, whether it's a business, a dream, or your own self-respect. Sometimes walking away completely is the only way to move forward. It's painful, but it's freedom. Thank you for listening to my story. If it hit home, drop a like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear this. What's a family challenge you've faced and how did you push through? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to read your stories.